The fluorescent lights of the Clear River Meadows Community Center conference room hummed with a flat, indifferent buzz. Daniel Hogard felt the sound in his teeth. He stood at the flimsy lectern, his hands resting on a sheaf of papers he had meticulously arranged. Across the long table, the 5 members of the Architectural Control Committee sat like a panel of bored deities. At the center, of course, was Karen Winters. As president of the board of directors, Karen was an ex officio member of every committee. It was a prerogative she never failed to exercise. She wore a crisp, cream-colored blazer, her blonde hair arranged in a severe bob that seemed to defy both gravity and humidity. She adjusted the microphone in front of her, letting her perfectly manicured fingers tap against the bass twice a small, percussive gesture of impatience. "Mr. Hogard," she said, her voice smooth and cool, not looking at him but addressing the room at large. "The agenda is quite full this evening. We've already given you 7 minutes. Please be brief." Daniel took a steadying breath, resisting the urge to point out that 4 of those minutes had been taken up by Karen explaining the procedural rules for speaking. "Thank you, Madam President. As I was explaining, the retaining wall along the southwest portion of my property was not a cosmetic addition. It's a dry stack stone wall, less than 2 feet high, installed over a decade ago for erosion control, after the heavy rains this spring. You can see from these photographs." He slid an 8x10 glossy photo across the table. "It did its job perfectly. It prevented a significant amount of topsoil from washing off my property and into the common area drainage swale." He had come to the ACC meeting proactively, after the flood. A courtesy notice, a cheerful little slip of paper that felt anything but courteous, had appeared on his door, mentioning an unapproved landscape feature. He'd hoped to resolve it with a simple variance request. A bit of neighborly explanation. He was quickly learning that Clear River Meadows did not operate on neighborly explanations. One of the committee members, a retired dentist named Bill, squinted at the photo. "It looks sturdy enough." Karen did not glance at the picture. Her eyes were fixed on the document in front of her. A copy of the covenants, conditions and restrictions. The issue, Mr. Hogard, is not its sturdiness. The issue is its existence. Section 8.4.2 of the CC&Rs is quite clear. All landscape modifications, including but not limited to walls, fences, and berms, require prior written approval from the ACC. Was such approval sought or obtained when this wall was constructed? No, it was not. Daniel admitted calmly. "My father built it 12 years ago, before we fully understood the scope of the HOA's architectural guidelines. However, given its functional purpose, and the fact that it has stood for over a decade without complaint, I am formally requesting a retroactive variance." "A retroactive variance," Karen repeated, the words tasting like something unpleasant in her mouth. She finally looked at him, her gaze as neutral and unreadable as a pane of glass. "The board does not typically grant retroactive variances for unapproved structures, especially those that may impact the integrity of the community's common areas." Impact the integrity. Daniel felt a flash of heat behind his ribs. It protected the integrity of the common area. Without it, that entire swale would be choked with silt. He was a retired architect. He knew the physics of water and soil. He had designed buildings to withstand far greater forces than a spring flood. "That is your opinion," Karen stated. "The association's landscape engineer has a different one. It is his assessment that unapproved structures, such as your wall and several mature, non-native trees on your lot, may have obstructed the natural flow of water, contributing to the overflow and subsequent damage to the common area greenbelt during the recent weather event." The room went silent. The accusation hung in the air, absurd and menacing. She was blaming his small garden wall and a handful of oak trees for a 100-year flood. This was no longer about a simple rule violation. "That's a baseless assertion," Daniel said, his voice dropping, losing its neighborly tone and gaining a harder, more precise edge. "I would be very interested to see that engineer's report." "It is part of the board's ongoing assessment of the flood damage and is currently under legal review," Karen said. A perfect practice deflection. "In the meantime, your variance request is premature. The structure in question is in violation. The committee's position is that it must be removed." She looked to her left and right. "Do I have a motion to table Mr. Hogard's request, pending resolution of the existing violation?" Hands went up, hesitant at first, then firming under her unwavering gaze. "The motion carries," Karen announced, making a neat little checkmark on her agenda. "Thank you for your time. Mr. Hogard, the next item is the Hendersons' request for a satellite dish." Daniel stood there for a moment, the sheaf of papers feeling heavy and useless in his hands. He had been dismissed, not just dismissed, but publicly humiliated with a preposterous, insidious accusation. He gathered his photos and documents, his movements deliberate and controlled. As he turned to leave, he paused and looked directly at Karen Winters. "Per the bylaws," he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the room, "I will be appealing this to the board." Karen's smile was thin and tight. "That is certainly your right." He walked out of the humming, fluorescent room into the humid evening air. The fight, he now understood, had just begun. He felt a dull, steady pressure behind his ribs, a physical reminder of the stakes. This wasn't about a wall anymore. This was about his home. "She what?" Sarah asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and weary resignation. She sat in her favorite armchair in the living room, a soft blanket draped over her lap despite the warm May evening. The stress of the last few years, her diagnosis, the endless doctor's appointments, the delicate balance of her health had left faint, silvery lines around her eyes. But they still sparkled with the same fierce intelligence Daniel had fallen in love with 30 years ago. "She's blaming our wall and the oak trees for the flooding in the common area," Daniel said, pacing the length of their oriental rug. "She called them an obstruction to the natural flow of water." He ran a hand through his graying hair. "It's insane, Sarah. It's an engineered lie. The common area flooded because their drainage system is undersized and poorly maintained. I've been saying it for years." "I know you have, honey," she said softly. Her composure was his anchor. When he felt his temper rising, her calm rationality pulled him back. "But you know what this is about. It's never about the thing they say it's about." She gestured to the built-in bookshelf, overflowing with leather-bound volumes on architecture and history. "Get the black binder. Let's see what it actually says." Daniel pulled down the thick, 3-ring binder, labeled Clear River Meadows HOA, governing documents. It had been part of the mountain of paperwork they'd inherited when his parents passed, and they'd moved back into his childhood home 5 years ago. His property was one of the original parcels, a 5-acre holdout of old trees and rolling pasture that the developers had been forced to build around, creating an awkward seam between his land and the meticulous geometry of the suburbs. He flipped through the tabs: bylaws, rules and regulations, architectural guidelines, until he found the covenants. He ran his finger down the index to Section 8, Use Restrictions and Rules. "Here it is," he muttered, finding the clause Karen had cited. CC&Rs, Section 8.4.2, Landscape and Structural Modifications. He read the paragraph aloud. "In order to preserve the aesthetic uniformity and architectural harmony of the community, no owner shall install, construct, or alter any structure, fence, wall, or other improvement visible from any street or common area without the prior written approval of the Architectural Control Committee. He stopped, looking up at Sarah. You hear that? Aesthetic uniformity and architectural harmony. This is for aesthetic uniformity, not flood control. This can't be right. She's misapplying the covenant entirely. Of course she is, Sarah said. She's a bully. Daniel. And bullies don't care about the rules. They only care about how they can use them as a weapon. The stress of the conversation was making her breathing a little shallow. He saw her subtly press a hand to her chest, a gesture that always sent a spike of cold fear through him. The doctors had been clear stress was her enemy. A prolonged, nasty fight with a vindictive HOA president was the last thing she needed. This wasn't just about protecting his property. It was about protecting her peace. He walked over to the old oak filing cabinet in the corner of his study. He pulled open the bottom drawer and carefully extracted a long, rolled-up tube of paper, yellowed with age, and held together by a brittle rubber band that snapped as he touched it. He unrolled it across the coffee table. It was the original survey plat of his property, drawn up when his father bought the land 50 years ago. The crisp lines, the surveyor's elegant cursive, the official stamp from the county recorder's office. It was a map of his history. His finger traced the boundaries. The northern edge bordered the main road. The east and west were flanked by cookie-cutter cul-de-sacs. And the southern line, the one in contention, ran parallel to the common area greenbelt. He saw the faint outline of Ash Creek as it meandered through the common space, and the precise notation of his property line, set back a good 50 feet from the creek's historical high-water mark. He ran his finger along that southern boundary again and again. There were utility easements marked in dotted lines, but nowhere, not in any legend or notation, did the map mention a view corridor or any other HOA easement that would grant them control over his trees or landscaping. There's nothing here, he said, a sense of grim certainty settling over him. She has no legal basis. The land is mine. The trees are mine. The wall is on my private lot. Then she's bluffing, Sarah said, or she thinks you won't have the energy to call her on it. Daniel rolled up the old map, his movements slow and deliberate. She's about to find out how much energy I have. He knew this would be a paper war, a battle of clauses and codicils, of motions and minutes, and he intended to be better armed. May 15th. The mail carrier's truck always seemed to groan as it made its way up their long gravel driveway. Daniel was in the workshop, sanding down a piece of reclaimed oak, when he heard the familiar crunch of tires. A few minutes later, Sarah called out from the back porch, "Daniel, there's a certified letter for you." His stomach tightened. Certified letters were never good news. They were the modern equivalent of a process server, a bureaucratic harbinger of trouble. He wiped the sawdust from his hands and went inside. She was holding a stark white business envelope from Pinnacle Property Management Group. A green certified mail receipt was stapled to the front. He saw the long tracking number 7218-39-02-1445-6712 and knew this was the next step in Karen's methodical assault. He took the letter from Sarah, his thumb tearing through the seal. The paper inside was thick, official. He unfolded it and began to read. RE Formal Notice of Violation. CCNRs, WIRE 8.4.2 and FREE 7.3 Property, 112, Ash Creek Lane, Clear River, WI APN 045-22109. Dear Mr. Hogard, this letter serves as a formal notice of violation regarding your property located at the above address. An inspection conducted by the association has confirmed the existence of an unapproved structure, a stone retaining wall, and several non-compliant landscape elements mature trees designated as view obstructing along the southern boundary of your lot, adjacent to the association's common area. These installations are in direct violation of the Clear River Meadows CC&Rs. Specifically, FAR 8.4.2, Landscape and Structural Modifications, requiring prior written approval for all structural and landscape alterations. FAR 7.3, Owner Maintenance Responsibility, holding owners responsible for maintaining their lots in a manner that does not adversely affect the aesthetic or functional integrity of the community's common areas. The Board of Directors has determined that these violations contributed to the obstruction of natural water flow during the recent flood event, exacerbating damage to common area property. Therefore, you are hereby directed to take the following corrective actions within 30 days of the date of this letter. 1. Demolish and completely remove the unapproved stone retaining wall at your sole cost and expense. 2. Remove the 5 mature oak trees identified by the association's arborist as obstructing the designated common area view corridor. Failure to cure these violations by June 14th will result in the levying of monetary fines against your property account, commencing at a rate of $100 per day, per violation. As stipulated in the association's fine and enforcement policy, please be advised that continued non-compliance may lead to further enforcement action, including but not limited to a notice of hearing before the board and the potential placement of a lien on your property. Sincerely, Mark Davies, Community Association Manager, Pinnacle Property Management Group. On behalf of the Clear River Meadows Board of Directors. Daniel read the letter twice, then a third time, the words blurring into a toxic soup of bureaucratic jargon. Designated common area view corridor, sole cost and expense $100 per day, per violation. That was $600 a day. Over $18,000 a month in fines. It was an extortion note dressed up in a business suit. "It's official," he said, handing the letter to Sarah. Her face paled as she read it. "This is insane," she whispered. "They can't make you cut down the oaks. Your father planted those trees." He looked out the window at the trees in question, their ancient limbs stretching toward the sky. They were older than the entire subdivision. The idea of a chainsaw biting into their bark made him physically ill. This wasn't about a view. It was about dominance. It was Karen Winters trying to prove that her power extended even to the roots of his history. "She thinks she can bury us in paper," Daniel said, a cold, hard resolve solidifying in his chest. "She thinks I'm just some old farmer who will get scared and roll over." He picked up the phone. "Well, I'm not. And I know how to read a blueprint better than she does." His first move was a tactical error, born of a lingering belief in reason. He called Mark Davies at Pinnacle Property Management. He spent 10 minutes on hold, listening to a tinny instrumental version of a pop song he vaguely recognized. Finally, a polite, dispassionate voice came on the line. "Pinnacle Management. This is Mark." Daniel explained who he was, referencing the violation letter. He spoke calmly, laying out his case with the precision of an architect presenting a plan. He explained the wall's functional purpose, the age of the trees, the text of the CC&Rs, which clearly stated the rule was for aesthetics, not flood control. He mentioned that his plat map showed no such view corridor easement on his property. Mr. Davies listened patiently. There were clicks of a keyboard in the background. "I see the violation notes here, Mr. Hogard," he said when Daniel had finished. His tone was sympathetic but firm, the practiced voice of a man paid to be a wall. "I understand your position. However, Pinnacle Management's role is to enforce the decisions of the Board of Directors. We don't have the authority to interpret the covenants or override a violation notice that has been formally issued. "So, you're just a messenger?" Daniel asked, the frustration starting to fray the edges of his voice. "We are the association's managing agent." "Yes," Davies replied smoothly. "The board has made its determination based on the advice of its own consultants. The violation stands. Your option, as outlined in the governing documents, is to cure the violation or to formally appeal to the board at a scheduled hearing." The ACC already denied my variance request based on this same faulty premise, Daniel countered. "And the board is led by Karen Winters, who seems to have a personal vendetta against my oak trees. An appeal seems futile." "Nevertheless, that is the process," Mr. Davies said, the politeness now feeling like a cage. "The board's decision is final. We just enforce it. You have until June 14th to comply. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" Daniel hung up the phone, the dial tone buzzing in his ear. He felt trapped, not by a person, but by a system, a labyrinth of rules, procedures, and polite, unyielding functionaries designed to wear you down, to make compliance the path of least resistance. They had built a fortress of bureaucracy, and Karen Winters was sitting in the throne room, untouchable. "Well," he said to Sarah, who had been watching him with concerned eyes, "that was like punching a pillow. Time for a different approach." He needed leverage. He needed a key to unlock the fortress. And for that, he needed someone who knew where all the secret doors were hidden. Eleanor Vance looked less like an investigator and more like a librarian who had decided to go rogue. She was a small, bird-like woman in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, for 40 years. She had worked as a clerk at the county recorder's office, which meant she knew the labyrinth of public records deeds, plats, permits, and liens better than anyone in the state. Now, in her retirement, she ran a tidy little business as a freelance paralegal and researcher, specializing in, as she put it, unraveling administrative knots. They met in a quiet corner of a downtown coffee shop, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans. Daniel laid out the whole story: the ACC meeting, the violation letter, the phone call with the property manager. He handed her copies of everything, including his father's old plat map. Eleanor read through the documents, her lips pursed in concentration. She tapped a long, thin finger on the violation letter. "Designated Common Area View Corridor," she read aloud, a wry smile playing on her lips. "That's a lovely turn of phrase. It sounds so official. It's also, 99% of the time, complete fiction unless it's explicitly recorded as an easement on your deed or the master plat. Is it?" "Not on my deed or any survey I've ever seen," Daniel confirmed. "Then we start there," she said, her eyes glinting. "We pull the official, recorded master plat for the entire Clear River Meadows development from the county archives. We'll get a certified copy. That will be your Exhibit A. Then, we dig into the HOA itself. People like Karen Winters love power, but they are often lazy about the paperwork that props it up." For the next week, Eleanor became his guide through the digital and physical archives of local governance. She showed him how to navigate the county's clunky online portal to find every permit and variance ever filed by the HOA. She took him to the recorder's office, a hushed, dusty room that smelled of old paper and binding glue, and taught him how to use the microfiche readers to look up the original development plans for Clear River Meadows. And then, they hit the HOA's own public website. It was a glossy, professional-looking portal managed by Pinnacle. It had photo galleries of community barbecues and a calendar of events. It also had a section for governing documents and records, as required by state law. It was there they found the minutes for the board of directors meetings going back 3 years. "Let's look at the meetings right after the flood," Eleanor suggested, peering over his shoulder at his laptop screen. Daniel clicked on the link for the April meeting, held just a week after the storm. He scrolled through the PDF. Standard stuff: call to order, approval of previous minutes, treasurer's report. Then he saw a heading, New Business Post-Flood Remediation Assessment. He felt a jolt of anticipation. But the paragraph that followed was a solid block of black. A small note was typed underneath, redacted pending legal review. "Well, now, isn't that interesting?" Eleanor murmured. "They're legally allowed to redact minutes pertaining to active litigation or personnel matters. But redacting a general discussion about flood repair, that's not a legal strategy. That's a cover-up." What could they be hiding? Daniel wondered aloud. "The one thing an HOA board fears more than lawsuits," Eleanor said, taking a sip of her now cold tea. "Liability. They're hiding their own culpability. I'd bet my pension on it." The next discovery was more subtle. Eleanor, with her decades of experience, knew that money was the root of all procedural evil. She cross-referenced the HOA's approved vendor list with state business filings. It took 2 days of painstaking work, but she found it. The landscaping company that had received the new, lucrative contract to repair the common area, Greenbelt, a company called Wyoming Scapes LLC, had been incorporated just 6 months prior. One of the 2 registered agents listed on the official paperwork was a man named Martin Winters. "Any relation?" Eleanor asked. Her eyebrow arched. "Her brother-in-law," Daniel said, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening thud. "He's a contractor. Not a very good one, from what I remember." "So, Karen's board is awarding no-bid contracts to her relatives," Eleanor summarized. "It's a classic small pond grift, but it still doesn't explain the obsession with your property." She leaned back, tapping her pen on her notepad. "There's a piece missing. A motive. This feels personal. Did you or your family ever have a run-in with her before all this?" Daniel thought back. He barely knew the woman. She'd moved into the subdivision about 10 years ago. They'd exchanged pleasantries at the grocery store. Nothing more. Then, a memory surfaced, hazy and distant. "My father," he said slowly, "just before he passed away. He told me she'd made him an offer. She and her husband wanted to buy a 2-acre parcel at the back of our property, the part that adjoins the common area." Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "And what did he say?" "He told her, politely, to go jump in a lake. He said the land wasn't for sale, not 1 square inch. Never would be." Eleanor smiled, a slow, grim smile of understanding. "And now you know." She said, "This isn't about a wall. It isn't about trees, or view corridors, or flood control. This is about revenge. And if we can find out what they're hiding in those redacted minutes, I think we'll find out it's about money, too." The breakthrough came from a place neither of them expected. Eleanor still had friends in the county government, old hands who, like her, believed that public records were meant to be public. One of them worked in the department that reviewed stormwater management plans for new developments. Out of professional curiosity, this friend had requested the HOA's engineering reports after the flood. The HOA's law firm had tried to block the request, but they couldn't stop a public official with the proper authority. Eleanor met Daniel for lunch 2 days later, a plain manila envelope in her hands. She didn't say a word, just slid it across the table. Daniel opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of the unredacted minutes from the April board meeting. He read the missing paragraph, his heart starting to pound a steady, heavy rhythm against his ribs. Director Pendleton raised a query regarding the preliminary report from the association's consulting engineer, Geotech Solutions, which states that the primary cause of the common area flooding was the catastrophic failure of the subsurface drainage system due to inadequate maintenance and sediment buildup. President Winters stated that the Geotech report was preliminary and that the board's legal counsel advised focusing on external contributing factors, including non-compliant structures on adjacent properties that may have altered water flow. She proposed forming a special committee to investigate these external factors and to engage a different engineering firm for a second opinion. The motion was passed 3-2. Daniel looked up at Eleanor, speechless. "There it is," she said softly. "The smoking gun. Their own engineer told them it was their fault. The drainage system failed because of their neglect." It was all clear now. Karen knew the HOA was liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars in repairs, a cost that would lead to a massive special assessment on every homeowner. It would be a political disaster for her. It would expose her board's incompetence. So, she'd buried the report. She'd invented a scapegoat. She'd created the view corridor violation to shift the blame, to pin the cost of her own negligence on the man whose father had slighted her years ago. It was a breathtakingly cynical and malicious scheme. "She's not just a bully," Daniel said, the full weight of her corruption settling on him. "She's a crook." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "And we have the proof. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" June 5th. The second certified letter arrived on a Tuesday. This one was thicker. Daniel didn't even wait to go inside. He opened it right there at the mailbox. RE Notice of Hearing and Schedule of Fines. The letter informed him that, as he had failed to cure the violations by the deadline, fines had begun to accrue as of June 15th. The total amount owed was already $2,400. Furthermore, he was being summoned to a formal hearing before the Board of Directors on June 20th at 7:00 p.m. to provide evidence and testimony as to why further enforcement action, including the placement of a lien against the property, should not be taken. It was the next turn of the screw, a methodical application of pressure designed to make him panic and capitulate. He felt a surge of anger. But it was cold now, not hot. It was the anger of a man who held a winning hand and was waiting for the perfect moment to play it. That evening, he got a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. It was Arthur Pendleton, the one board member who had been named in the unredacted minutes. Arthur was in his 80s, a retired history professor who had lived in Clear River Meadows since it was built. He was the community's moral compass. "Daniel," he said, his voice low and strained. I probably shouldn't be making this call, but I have to." "I appreciate it, Arthur," Daniel said simply. "Listen to me. I saw the agenda for the hearing. Karen has the votes. Bill and Margaret will vote with her, no matter what. They're lining up their case to put a lien on your house. I've tried to reason with them, but she has them convinced that you're the reason everyone's homeowner's insurance is about to go up." He sighed, a tired, defeated sound. "My advice, just comply. Take down the wall. Cut down one of the trees as a gesture of goodwill. It's not right. I know it's not. But a lien can be a nightmare. It can affect your mortgage, your credit. It's not worth the fight. She's not worth the fight." Daniel listened, understanding that Arthur's advice came from a place of genuine concern, but also from a place of fear. Arthur was a good man trapped in a bad system, and he had chosen survival over confrontation. "Arthur," Daniel said, his voice calm and steady, "what if I could prove that the HOA's own engineer said the drainage system failed due to neglect? What if I could prove Karen buried that report to avoid a special assessment and find a scapegoat?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "My God," Arthur whispered. "Can you?" "I can," Daniel said. "The question is, if I present that proof at the hearing, in front of the entire community, what will you do?" The silence stretched longer this time. Daniel could hear the old man's labored breathing, the weight of a difficult decision being made. "I will do the right thing," Arthur finally said, his voice regaining a sliver of its old, professorial authority. "God help us all. Son, I will do the right thing." The conference room was packed. Word of the showdown had spread through the neighborhood, and nearly 50 homeowners were crammed into the stuffy space, lining the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The air was thick with tension and the smell of cheap coffee. Daniel sat in the front row with Sarah by his side. She had insisted on coming, her hand resting firmly on his, a silent, steady source of strength. In his briefcase was a neatly organized evidence pack, a large format, certified copy of the master plat map, highlighted copies of the CC&Rs, and the crown jewel, the unredacted minutes of the April board meeting. Karen Winters sat at the head of the table, flanked by her board. She looked composed, powerful, completely in her element. She called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel. "The first item on tonight's agenda," she announced, "is the hearing for the violation at 112 Ash Creek Lane. Mr. Hogard, you have been allotted 5 minutes to speak. The time will be kept by our secretary." A large digital clock on the wall was set to 5:00 and began to count down as Daniel approached the lectern. "Good evening, members of the board and my neighbors," he began, his voice even and calm. He did not look at Karen. He addressed the room. "I am here to address the violation notice concerning a small retaining wall and 5 oak trees on my property. The board has claimed these are in violation of the CC&Rs and contributed to flood damage. I am here to tell you, with evidence, that this claim is factually, legally, and morally false." He placed his first exhibit on an easel beside him. First, the law. The board cites Section 8.4.2 of the CC&Rs. Let me read the first line to you. "In order to preserve the aesthetic uniformity and architectural harmony of the community." This rule, by its own definition, is about aesthetics. It has no bearing on flood control. To apply it as such is a gross misinterpretation of our governing documents. 415. Second, the property rights. The board claims my trees and wall obstruct a designated common area view corridor. This is Exhibit A. He unfurled the certified plat map from the county recorder's office. This is the official, legally binding map of our community. It shows every property line, every road, every recorded easement. I invite the board to show me where this view corridor easement exists on my property. I can save you the time. It does not. It is an invention, created to justify this action. A murmur went through the crowd. Karen's face remained a placid mask, but Daniel could see a muscle twitching in her jaw. 320. So, if it's not about the CC&Rs, and it's not about a non-existent easement, what is it about the board claims my wall and trees caused the flooding? But let's look at what their own experts said. He held up the final document. This is a copy of the unredacted minutes from the board's own meeting on April 12th. The room went dead silent. Karen's composure finally cracked. Her eyes widened, almost imperceptibly. That document is confidential and was improperly obtained. She snapped. It was obtained through a lawful public records request by a concerned county official. Daniel replied smoothly, not missing a beat. And it says, and I quote from your own engineer's report, the primary cause of the common area flooding was the catastrophic failure of the subsurface drainage system due to inadequate maintenance and sediment buildup. Vassal. He let the words hang in the air. The board knew. They knew the flood was their fault. They knew their own neglect had caused hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. But rather than take responsibility, which would have required a massive special assessment on all of you, the board led by President Winters chose to bury the report. They chose to lie. And they chose to create a scapegoat out of my family, to pin their costly failure on my father's oak trees. As he was about to deliver his final, crushing blow about the landscaping contract awarded to her brother-in-law, his eyes scanned the room. He saw Mrs. Gable, a frail woman in her late 80s, sitting near the back. She was clutching a piece of paper, her face a mask of anxiety. He glanced at the agenda in his hand. Her name was next. Violation unapproved garden statuary gnomes. He knew Karen was targeting her out of pure spite for a complaint Mrs. Gable had made about a broken sprinkler. He had a choice. He could use his remaining time to utterly destroy Karen, to expose her cronyism and potential fraud, to humiliate her so completely she'd never show her face in the community again. It would be a vengeful, satisfying end. Or he could stick to the facts of his own case, secure a clean and undeniable victory based on the evidence already presented, and not drag a frightened old woman's gnome problem into a larger, uglier war. He looked at the unredacted minutes, then at Mrs. Gable. He thought of his wife and what she had said about fighting smartly, not emotionally, justice, not vengeance. He took a deep breath. 045. The evidence is clear, he concluded, his voice ringing with quiet authority. My property is not in violation. The board's claims are a fabrication, designed to conceal its own negligence from this community. I ask for two things. First, that the board vote immediately to dismiss this violation and waive all fines. And second, that the homeowners here tonight demand a full independent audit of this board's maintenance records and financial dealings. Thank you. The clock showed 10 seconds remaining. He walked back to his seat as a stunned silence gave way to an explosion of noise. The room erupted. Homeowners were on their feet, shouting questions, demanding answers. Karen hammered the gavel, her face pale and strained. Order. This hearing is for the Hogard property only. We will have order. But she had lost control. The outrage was a tidal wave she could not stop. Then, a clear, steady voice cut through the chaos. It was Arthur Pendleton. He stood up slowly, his frail frame seeming to gain strength as he spoke. Madam President, he said, his voice trembling slightly, but full of conviction. I believe Mr. Hogard has presented compelling evidence that warrants immediate action. I move to dismiss the violation against parcel 045-22109 in its entirety, with prejudice. There is a motion on the floor, Karen said through gritted teeth. Is there a second? For a moment, no one spoke. Then, another board member, Margaret, who usually sided with Karen, raised her hand hesitantly. I second it, she mumbled, avoiding Karen's furious glare. All in favor, Arthur asked, taking charge. His hand shot up. So did Margaret's. Another member, seeing the tide turn, raised his. It was a 3-2 majority. The motion carries, Arthur declared. The violation is dismissed. A wave of applause and cheers swept through the room. Karen sat frozen, her authority shattered. Arthur wasn't finished. Furthermore, he announced, his voice growing stronger, in light of the evidence presented concerning the suppressed engineering report, I call for a motion of no confidence in our president and for the immediate launch of a full, independent forensic audit of the association's finances and contracts for the past 2 years. The room roared its approval. The property manager, Mr. Davies, looked like he was about to be physically ill. Karen tried to adjourn the meeting, but she was shouted down by the homeowners she had tried to deceive. The fortress had crumbled. Daniel didn't stay to watch the rest of the coup. He felt Sarah's hand squeeze his. He had won. He quietly packed his briefcase, and, as the residents began to swarm the board table, he walked over to Mrs. Gable. He knelt beside her chair. "Mrs. Gable," he said gently, "I'm an architect. I'd be happy to help you fill out the variance paperwork for your gnomes. I think we can make a very strong case for their aesthetic harmony." Tears welled in the old woman's eyes. "Oh, thank you, Daniel," she whispered. "Thank you." He had won his victory with integrity, and in doing so, had found something better than revenge, the quiet satisfaction of helping a neighbor. In the weeks that followed, the full truth emerged. The audit revealed that Karen Winters had not only suppressed the engineering report, but had also steered the multi-million-dollar flood remediation contract toward her brother-in-law's new and unqualified company. Her reign was over. The board, under Arthur's interim leadership, voted to censure her, remove her from all committees, and began proceedings to recall her from her seat entirely. Daniel's fines were formally waived and expunged from his record. At the next monthly meeting, Daniel Hogard was on the agenda again, not as a defendant, but as a guest speaker. He proposed a new bylaw, drafted with Eleanor's help, requiring that all vendor contracts over $5,000 be put to a competitive bidding process, and that all non-privileged engineering and safety reports be made immediately available to the community. It passed unanimously. The era of secrecy was over. But the final surprise, the last piece of the puzzle, came a month later. A local reporter, digging deeper into the scandal, uncovered the real reason Karen had been so desperate to get her hands on that 2-acre parcel of his land all those years ago. It wasn't just for a bigger backyard. His property contained the only viable, flat-grade access point from the main road to the undeveloped county land behind the Clear River Meadows subdivision. A developer, in partnership with Karen's brother-in-law, had been quietly planning a new, high-density housing project. Acquiring Daniel's land was the key to the entire deal, a deal that would have been worth millions to the Winters family and would have destroyed the quiet nature of the entire community. His small personal fight over a stone wall hadn't just been defensive. It had, without him even knowing it, protected the entire valley from a corrupt and greedy scheme. That evening, Daniel stood on his back porch with Sarah, watching the sunset paint the sky in strokes of orange and purple over the tops of his father's oak trees. The air was cool and clean. In the distance, Ash Creek murmured its timeless song. He had fought the HOA and won. But more than that, he had defended his home, protected his family's peace, and reminded a community that the strongest walls are not built of stone, but of truth.